District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. I have two topics to discuss on a very special edition of District of Conservation outside of our usual Monday or Tuesday postings. I'm going to be focusing on more domestic critical minerals production, given the news of two very pivotal projects here in America, a new mine opening and an expansion of an existing rare earth elements one in California. Plus, I want to give a debrief on Rigs-to-Reef, which is a great program taking decommissioned oil rigs and converting it to fish habitat, going off of a premiere of a documentary that I attended in Washington, D.C. yesterday night. Let's start with critical minerals. We hear about critical minerals being needed for clean energy, manufacturing, defense, tech, computers, all these different derivatives. But if you don't know this already, we do not source a lot of these critical minerals, including rare earth elements. And there are 17 rare earth elements that encompass the wider critical minerals that you often hear about. But it's important to note the distinction. China owns 70% of production and over 90% of processing globally when you think of it. We import 10,000 tons of critical minerals from abroad, 70% of which from China. And if you care about national security concerns, bolstering the economy, American jobs, being critical mineral independent, much like being energy independent, it also kind of falls into this energy independence lane as well. You don't want to be importing critical minerals, including rare earth elements, from an adversary nation like China. That's not diametrically opposed with free trade. Obviously, China does not engage in free trade fairly. And so we can look to reshore a lot of that here at home. And we have the capabilities to do so with opening more mines or expanding existing mines. And this doesn't mean you have to open dozens of mines across the country, especially near sensitive environmental sites. But a couple mines could help meet this demand, maybe 5 or so we can process, refine, and have 10,000 tons here at our disposal. And you can accomplish that from what I'm reading with expanding or opening a couple new mines. The first of the two mines I want to talk about is the Brook Mine in Wyoming, owned by and overseen by a company called Ramaco Resources out of Kentucky. So they specialize in metallurgical coal. And if you don't know this, coal deposits are actually a treasure trove of rare earth elements. I just learned this the last 6 months or so, but it's prime ground for REEs, rare earth elements. And this is very evident in the discovery at Brook Mine, which just broke ground last week. The existing area where they're going to be exploring rare earth elements here, and I'm going to read for you what this exactly entails, some of the specifics, but it's on 4,300 acres of the total 15,000 acres that would be potentially open to mining in this location in Wyoming. This spot was acquired by Ramaco Resources in 2011, originally to explore coal. They made this discovery of rare earth elements in 2023. I remember the press update that this $2 million mine is home to $37 billion worth of rare earth elements, according to the Wall Street Journal. I was very intrigued, and it piqued my interest. I wrote about this at Independent Women's Forum, and then I'll go into this MP Minerals update, an expansion of the rare earth element project already in California. But what is really interesting about this one, outside of the fact that this new one can help us cut our reliance on China, it's going to be the first rare earth element mine to open in the U.S. in 70 years. So we've been importing rare earth elements from abroad, largely from China, for almost that period. And when you read into that and look into that, that should be alarming. Why are we so dependent on China, a country that does not adhere to the same standards as we do, that does not really regard conservation whatsoever, that engages in slave labor, what have you? Energy Secretary Chris Wright said of this very important breaking ground event, quote, "This is a monumental step towards unleashing the full potential of American energy by utilizing the abundant resources we have here right at home." So as I mentioned, this $2 million coal mine holds $37 billion in RE treasures. They made the discovery in May of 2023. And per a preliminary economic assessment report, The mine spans over 15,800 acres. As I mentioned, 4,500 acres deemed suitable for mining as of 2020. They report optimally and ultimately that there are 1.7 million tons of oxide, rare earth oxide ore of proved mineral reserves or an extractable deposit with 90% geological and economic certainty on this 4,500 acre site. By the time it's fully commissioned in 2029, although I've seen reports that they are going to request an expediting by the Trump administration, hopefully to 2028, maybe sooner, the new mine is expected to produce 1,242 tons of rare earth oxides, including 565 metric tons, or 40% of future production of REOs and critical minerals such as neodymium, dysprosium, gallium, germanium, terbium, and scandium, which are all used for computers and other related derivatives. Brook Mine won't be the only mine needed to help us wean our dependence on China. Similarly, I think a day or two ahead of this announcement or breaking ground at Brook Mine, it was announced that the Mountain Pass rare earth mine in California is entering a partnership with the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense bought about $400 million in shares of this company, of the only operating rare earth minerals mine functioning in California and in the United States. The project, which will be known as 10X Facility, is slated to be completed by 2028 and could help boost manufacturing capacity of rare earth elements to an estimated 10,000 metric tons. So that's the amount we import annually to have our needs met, basic needs met with rare earth elements. But that doesn't mean that's where we'll stop. But because of technological advancements, artificial intelligence, more defense, more tech, and the like, we will probably be consuming more than 10,000 tons. And if you have these two combined mines working optimally and coming online in the next few years or sooner, and more announced projects, you could meet our needs for critical minerals without having to rely on other countries. So you bring that here, jobs for Americans. That doesn't mean we're not going to be exporting rare earth elements. If we try to combat China here, we could become the new hub of rare earth elements. So countries can come to us, work with us, arrange free trade deals with critical minerals in us, and get people to move away from China and migrate towards the US. Kind of like what we're doing with our energy here. We are sitting on so many billions and trillions of cubic feet of proven oil and gas reserves, meaning these are 90% geologically and economically productive deposits of oil and natural gas. Very similar to the Brook Mine, having proved reserves that are geologically and economically known. A site wouldn't be explored if it didn't have this viability. Broadly speaking, this is part of and complementary to the President's March 20th, 2025 executive order on immediate measures to increase American mineral production, to improve domestic mining operations and cut reliance on bad actors like China. And as I mentioned, China owns a monopoly share of rare earth elements and critical minerals, 70% of the world's deposits that it owns, and 90% of processing operations. That should alarm you. No matter where you stand politically, if you care about the environment, if you care about economic productivity, leaning on China, big mistake. Bring that here. This, again, does not mean we can't trade with other countries. We can't, work with other people, but onshoring this back here to the United States makes sense. And as I stated before, 17 rare earth elements are in existence today. They're a subset of critical minerals, components needed for technology, defense, clean energy. They are, however, not rare, despite what the name suggests. They're just difficult to procure and are typically discovered in small quantities, which is why they're called rare earths. The U.S. Geological Survey reports that the U.S. annually imports 10,000 tons of rare earth oxides from overseas, with 70% of imports originating from China. So as I argue at Independent Women's Forum in a blog post, if you want to read more about this, and click on the hyperlinks I have to learn more and do some exploring for yourself, these two projects, I think, could help strengthen our standing in this space, cut reliance on China, and compete with them so we can become a hub of critical minerals, including and encompassing rare earth elements. It's good for us economically. It's good for us national security-wise. It's also good for us environmentally because the mining that would be done here wouldn't be employing slave labor. We have far stricter environmental standards. The companies work very diligently with conservation stakeholders to ensure that there is no pollution of air quality, water quality, of lands. They would have to go through the strictest rigor, strictest tests, and strictest adherence to operate. That's where we are as a country today. Maybe 50, 60 years ago, these standards weren't in place, but today, because of social media and just because of regulations and scrutiny, these companies don't want to engage in bad environmental practices. Why would it be in their interest to do so? They would impact their bottom line negatively. Also, they want to curry favor with people and showcase that production doesn't impede environmental progress. The two can go hand in hand. Which leads me to my next story, a very fascinating story. If you don't already know about the Rigs-to-Reef program, where decommissioned oil rigs aren't fully removed, but are instead left in place, taking out the oil component, of course, to create fish habitat with the existing structure that is left over from the rigs. I've heard about this program for years. I haven't done snorkeling or seen it firsthand, but I've just heard so many people from Gulf states, especially Louisiana, talk about this program. I've long advocated for. I think it's a good use of conservation. It's a good conservation practice. It's not greenwashing from the oil and gas industries. And last night, I got to see this in context at the DC premiere of a new documentary called Steel to Structure, the Rigs-to-Reef story. It contextualizes this program really well. I want to explain the laws that kind of surround this and are behind this, why this is a good program, even if you don't live in the Gulf of America or in states impacted by this. If you care about fishing, if you care about conservation, and you like energy production, this program weaves all of that together and really showcases that, again, energy production does not have to be at odds with conservation. You want to have partners like big oil, like big gas, or even smaller conglomerates, mid-size, small production companies as well. And those are actually who are behind a lot of these projects. And of course, you do get some partnerships with Shell and Chevron and what have you. But it's actually a lot of these midstream, upstream operators who are behind the scenes with this. The documentary was sponsored and created by Arena Energy and hosted by the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Big fan of CSF, and I was grateful to get that invitation a few weeks ago to attend. CSF does a lot with balance use, and it was really good that they were hosting this format. So more on Arena Energy if you're curious to know what their mission is. It was founded in 1999 on the belief that maturing producing areas of the Gulf of America shelf still held vast potential, and that with the right technology, talented oil and gas finders could unlock these drilling opportunities. Today, that vision has been realized many times over. I want to preface the discussion of Rigs-to-Reef with some context about coral structure. So you see the headlines of coral reefs disappearing, and then you see the opposite report of coral reefs are in abundance and flourishing. And if you want to address coral reef concerns, no better way to do it than through decommissioned oil rigs, which are actually underappreciated marine sanctuaries that people don't often hear about. And this was actually emphasized in the documentary by a group called Blue Latitudes. And I heard about this group and got familiar with the co-founders, two very fantastic women, I think a few years ago when I attended EarthX and I saw what they were doing. And these look like ardent environmentalists who would never support or partner with oil and gas. And to see them featured in the documentary alongside Natural Resources Chairman in the House, Bruce Westerman, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, a representative from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Democratic lawmaker from Texas, his name is slipping off the top of my head, different boat captains, former rig workers, lots of different stakeholders spanning the partisan divide. And what was emphasized in the screening last night was that this is not a partisan issue. This has been a long-standing program, and I'm going to explain why that is, and how utilizing this infrastructure and not wholly ridding of these rigs as environmentalists demand the full removal of it, how that could actually invite a lot of environmental problems, including a biodiversity crisis. Yet these legacy environmentalists tell us we're the ones creating an environmental crisis, yet they're propagating that through arguing to remove decommissioned oil rigs in this manner when you can repurpose them and retrofit them to become fish habitat. I took some notes throughout the documentary to go into a greater town hall column to be published this Friday. But from the synopsis of the Rigs-to-Reef program relating to this documentary, this program, the Rigs-to-Reef program, was born out of the National Fishing Enhancement Act of 1984. It allows parts of offshore platforms to remain in place as artificial reefs, fostering vibrant ecosystems in the otherwise barren, shallow Gulf waters. The documentary delves into this complex interplay of industry, government, and nature, highlighting the intricate permitting process that involves federal agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers and state reef coordinators. Despite the success of converting over 600 platforms into reefs, the program faces challenges. This is very similar to other energy infrastructure projects. This is me inserting my opinion. And this is what I found in terms of a lot of commonalities when I was watching this and learning more about this law and Rigs-to-Reef last night. Bureaucratic delays, ecological trade-offs, and the rapid removal of the Gulf's 1,300 remaining platforms. The film advocates for urgent reforms, streamlined permitting, reefing in place, and increased conservation funding to preserve these vital habitats. Through stunning visuals and compelling storytelling, it underscores the need for swift action to secure a sustainable future for the Gulf's marine life and coastal communities. Here are some of the notes I took when I was observing this. So they mentioned permitting and legacy environmentalists advocating for the full removal of these rigs, which are detrimental to these established marine sanctuaries and, by extension, fish habitat. So the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Safety and Enforcement, BOEM, state reef coordinators, and having to align federal interests with state ambitions with environmental standards and preserves. So what happens, as I was able to observe in the film, and you can watch this documentary for yourself at rigs-to-reef.com. The full documentary is now available there as of today. They told us yesterday that today it would be publishing the full documentary for the public to view, so I encourage you to watch it. I will include links in the show notes for you to take a gander there. So what they do for allowing vessels to operate in the Gulf, they remove about 80% of rig structure. So for the reefs to be optimal and not create interference for commercial fisheries, recreational interests, what have you, these marine sanctuaries and decommissioned rigs are usually 80 feet below the waterline to allow for commercial barges to pass. As I mentioned, it's a great hub of biodiversity, and it's some of the most productive ecosystem in the planet. If you remove the platforms, it'll result in habitat loss, and nobody likes to talk about habitat loss. It's a problem onshore and offshore. And if you do this in this manner, as the film advocates, you lose that potential for restoring coral, for bolstering habitat, and the like. What is also a net benefit to this is that there's no loss to taxpayers through this program. There have been 600 platforms decommissioned. Only 20% have become habitat. Most are sadly lost to full removal. In terms of the permitting slog, the documentary said, and you can find data on this online, it's 4 years. That's very similar to nuclear reactors and other energy infrastructure projects, partial permitting process to get 4 years of approval. So the reforms that they advocate for, the speeding permitting of approval process, reefing in place, and funding for state conservation programs. It's good for a multitude of stakeholders. You often find commercial and recreational fishing interests at odds, but in this case, they're often not at odds, and also energy industries. There are 1,300 platforms that remain. And actually, what was pointed out in the film, and if you learn about this and watch the film, you'll be very impressed by this tidbit. Critically endangered fish species are even thriving in these decommissioned oil rigs in the structure that is created there. It also acts as a carbon sink, as the ladies from Blue Latitudes pointed out. Do you know that the cost of removal, if I got these factoids correctly, it's $3 to $3.9 billion per platform for full removal? Talk about a waste of money that'll come at the expense of taxpayers. And so the reforms for permitting reform can reduce time from years to months, cut costs and complexity. Half of savings go towards state conservation efforts. I believe that might be through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, since oil and gas royalties are tied to that, but I want to make sure I'm not putting misinformation out there. But I think it could be for a different program. And I'm going to, like I said, have a comprehensive examination into the law and the subsequent program, Rigs-to-Reef, at Town Hall. Maybe not LWCF, but a related program. And our program, Rigs-to-Reef, is so successful and enviable that even foreign countries are looking to us on what to do with their decommissioned oil rigs, perhaps repurpose it as habitat like this. And what was really interesting was to hear from, again, members of Congress. I think Representative Mike Ezell is going to be championing a bill in Congress with the help of the Natural Resources Committee. So we will likely see a reform bill for decommissioned oil rigs as it relates to Rigs-to-Reef, probably introduced soon as a standalone bill, maybe as part of reconciliation. I think probably as a standalone bill since it doesn't relate to budgetary concerns. So when that bill comes out, I will broadly discuss it here on the podcast. Yet talk about a confluence of production, conservation, multiple stakeholders, input, stewarding of taxpayer money, not wasting taxpayer money. Seems like a win-win scenario. Like I said, I knew topically what this program was, and yesterday's documentary premiere in DC was very illuminating for me to learn more about the specifics of this program. Again, you don't have to live in the Gulf of America or states bordering that body of water to applaud this program, to like this program, to learn more about this program, or want to see the program work better. So you're not losing decommissioned platforms to removal and therefore imperiling biodiversity and fish habitat. And imagine that if you use that argument against legacy environmentalists, accusing them of despoiling the environment in this manner, of using existing infrastructure, their heads will roll. Not surprisingly, this is very counterintuitive to oppose a measure like this, in my opinion. It'll be fascinating to track the progress of this program or reforms to the Rigs-to-Reef program. Again, check the documentary out. Do your own research. Yet I can confidently say that I think most Americans will like seeing this documentary, learning about the aims of the program, seeing that it's a boon to conservation, doesn't undermine production, and it really epitomizes true conservation efforts. We won't see decommissioned offshore wind turbines become fish structure, right? Because they create more disturbances, I think, in my opinion, they do. But we've seen people tout offshore wind turbines as fish structure. We have yet to see the full effects of that yet because they invite more disturbances of fish migration patterns. So we will see if they can compete with this. I don't think so. I think rigs make much more sense, but that's my personal opinion. Again, head over to rigs-to-reef.org. I'm not being compensated. I'm never compensated for saying or lauding anything. Watch the documentary for free, make your own assessment, and do your research. And as the participants of the documentary were saying last night, share the good word on social media. I think it's really noble and interesting and fascinating and brings about the complexities and marries them pretty well and showcases the ingenuity of American energy production that also prioritizes true conservation efforts. Like no other country can do what we do in terms of conservation, even with conventional energy. I know a lot of people like to attack oil and gas, but it's going to be here for the long term. We need this energy. I'm a big fan of nuclear. I like geothermal. I think hydropower is great. I'm very skeptical of renewables, as you hear on the show. I want renewables that work. Geothermal is one, nuclear is one, hydro is one that really, really works too, but is often vilified. These aforementioned projects can work in sync with conservation and blended well into the habitat. I have yet to see that with renewables like solar and wind. They cause a lot more environmental destruction, as Sarah Montalbano pointed out in her new report, which she detailed on the show yesterday. So we have to be careful about biting the hand that feeds us. Oil and gas is very important to our energy mix still. And even for derivatives that are made from oil and gas, we're very dependent on it. Might as well use it. Might as well use existing infrastructure to bolster fish habitats in this manner. Tell me what you think. As to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.